Hi, welcome to the What Drives You podcast. I'm Keith with Paper Transport. I serve as our Vice President of Safety and Recruiting.
I'm Joe Shevchak, the Vice President of Business Development at Paper Transport.
And I'm Ben Schill, CEO of Paper Transport.
So to kick off this week's podcast, we want to talk about a fun topic at Paper Transport. We're into progressive learning and continuous learning, and being at a conference last week, I think it was really interesting to just kind of hear the rest of the industry talk about some of the same things that we see right now at Paper Transport and see that the industry is struggling with. And I think it's really important to kind of keep yourself off of an island, right? Stay connected, stay in relationship with people so that you don't isolate yourself and think you're out on an island, maybe struggling and swimming through some things that others are right alongside with you. All right, our first key topic of discussion today is a hot one, and that's about today's spot market. So first question I want to pose to you guys is, historically, what is the spot market an indicator of?
I'll grab that. Certainly, as we look for indicators of where we are in the freight cycle, I think the spot market and spot rates actually kind of rise to the top. If you think about trucking in our industry, it's hundreds of thousands of carriers, hundreds of thousands of shippers, and you kind of come together in this, over time, the market tries to reach equilibrium with supply and demand. And the spot market is really that blend of how much capacity is in the market versus how much is demand. So when demand goes up, spot may go up, but spot prices may also go up if capacity falls out of the market. So it's really a blended kind of picture of the overall balance of supply and demand in the market. What we're seeing right now is no doubt we've been coming off a couple of years of high capacity growth or supply side growth in our market. So the spot market right now is primarily a product of kind of the oversupply that has been building with a number of healthy years, really starting with the beginning of the pandemic.
Sure. I think when you think about the spot market, one of the things about trucking is it's amazingly fluid. I mean, literally day to day, the market can change on a given lane if one shipper's shipping heavy or there's some weather disruption going on. So it's remarkably fluid. It's Econ 101 and amazing how effective the spot market is at figuring out where's capacity and where's freight.
Right, good and bad with that, but it is very fluid, certainly. So quick question to follow up that. We talked as a team maybe a week or two ago about $1.49 not being possible. We going to get there? Hopefully not.
Well, I've stopped predicting where we're going to end up and when it's going to turn. I think everybody that has predicted has been wrong. But, I believe, where we're at right now has to be pretty darn close to the bottom. And, it's also important to note that most carriers from a number of trucks, aren't necessarily operating at the spot rate out there. The spot rate is really an indication of a portion of capacity that's out in the truckload market. Now, truckload is obviously the biggest market in the OTR market, so it's a good indicator. But there's a lot of rates that aren't necessarily attached to that, whether it's more cost plus dedicated models, and there's a lot of companies that are primarily playing in the contract spot. So they're not necessarily it's not what all cylinders are firing on at that price. The $1.49, that was the low probably back in 2019. Whether or not we can get back to that point, again, I see that. I don't have a crystal ball, but the operating cost of carriers is so much higher now than it was in 2019. I have to believe we're bouncing at the floor right now.
Good. So,
Joe, you had something?
Oh, sorry, Joe, go ahead.
Thank you. I think what we do know is that it's unsustainably low. Right?
Yes.
We talked about it being a remarkably fluid market. What we know is that the current price point has to be driving out capacity, right? Because there are a number of trucks, a lot of carriers that do operate in that spot space, and they can't pay the bills at the current rate. So it doesn't matter what that real number is.
Right.
But what we do know is capacity has to be exiting the market because they can't pay the bills.
Yep, that makes complete sense. So what do we know and what do we not know, right? I mean, we've kind of just talked about that, but what are the unknowns and kind of the knowns right now?
I'd say the big unknown, right, is where is freight volume going to land, right? It's certainly been trending down, right? And I think we know that from COVID, right? For a long time, people were using and buying stuff, and now they're buying experiences instead. So freight has been trending down. The question is what happens with the economy, and which will drive the overall freight volume.
Yeah, I would agree with that. The demand side and where the economy is headed, forget about the freight cycle, is probably the biggest unknown. And again, there's a lot of people trying to predict what's happening, but, nobody really knows where that's headed. What we do know is it's very clear that there is a pattern, and what goes up must come down, what comes down must go up. And, when you get into these cycles, and this last one was, this has probably been the most dramatic buildup during the pandemic, and then the fall off since. So what we do know is we're 12 months into the fall off. So, this isn't we're pretty close to the low, but this has been happening for 12 months right now. So we're in that downside of the cycle. That, I think you can feel confident. What you don't know is the length of that trough and how long it's going to be. But, don't be fooled. I think every time we have these cycles, some people are fooled that this is the new normal. This is where things are going to be. The pandemic was a good piece of, hey, it's never coming down. Labor's changed, costs has changed. But the only thing that's certain is there are cycles in our industry and other industry. And, at some point they're going to start trudging upward again.
All right. So what should shippers expect, and what should they prepare for in the long term?
What they should expect is continued volatility, right? Yeah, okay. And the technology built into the world today is going to continue to make the market more volatile, right? So it's going to continue to drive down, and then it's going to, because it goes down so far, it's going to have to go up, again, faster. So I'd say they should expect continued volatility and be creating strategies to solve for that.
Yeah, I would agree with that. The cycles are more erratic. I guess It's the same cycle. It's the same, peak and trough, but they're being compressed and, with the volatility that Joe's talking about.
Yeah, I think I heard someone speak last week, talked about, the highest high, the longest high we've seen in a long time, and, the volatility of how far down it's gone or how long it may last, right? So I'd echo that, and I think I've heard a lot of smart people say the same things.
Yeah, what you will see is, well-run trucking companies and smart shippers in terms of how they interact with carriers. Those carriers and shippers are gonna figure this out. They always have. And what happens during these cycles is very rarely do you read about the world-class, well-run company that can't handle the cycle. That doesn't happen. It's kind of a purging exercise. On both sides. It causes some carriers, maybe they won't make it, or maybe they'll shrink quite a bit to take capacity out. And on the shipper side, it just provides some caution in terms of how they approach the market and how they think about things.
So regarding what to do if you're a shipper, what do you do? I don't know the answer to this, but what I would be thinking about is, there is no futures hedge in transportation. But we know it's a volatile market. And if you're a shipper that buys a commodity, you're hedging typically. Right. So is there some commodity, out there that you can hedge, to help smooth the bumps in trucking? I don't know the answer to that, but I think that's an interesting question, whether it's lumber, it's oil, or, what can you hedge, to help smooth the volatility, because I would anticipate more volatility.
All right, so we're going to move on to our next hot topic, maybe a little controversial. I don't know. More to come on that. We're talking hydrogen versus diesel. So with this economy debate and the pros and cons, I should say, let me phrase that. With this economy, let's debate the pros and cons of hydrogen versus diesel.
Sure. I don't know that it's a question of hydrogen versus diesel, right? I think the question is are alternative fuels here or not, right? I think that's what I would think about. And, so hydrogen, there's not a commercial truck on the road, right? I think perhaps maybe you can find a prototype, to run in the Class 8 trucks, right? So it's not there yet, commercially. I think, actually, if we think about hydrogen, I think it's an interesting topic. Because the way I think about hydrogen, it makes most sense to me. I don't really understand the science of it, so set that aside. But what you're really doing with hydrogen, is you're using electricity or solar power, to make hydrogen, out of water. And so really it's a battery, right? You're using electricity to make hydrogen that then you use to fuel the truck. So it's an interesting concept, right? And there's no tailpipe emissions. And so again, interesting concept, but it's not there commercially yet. Right. So I think, if we're thinking about alternative fuels, it's hydrogen, which isn't there commercially yet. Electric powered Class 8 trucks, they sell them, right? You could buy one. Really not practical, right now, right? So
let's kind of jump away from hydrogen and let's tackle other fuels, RNG. What's ready now, and what's the why behind that?
Sure. So, I would say RNG, renewable natural gas, is ready now. So renewable natural gas comes from anywhere where methane is created. Right? So landfills, wastewater treatment plants, manure digesters, creates renewable natural gas. And what the California Air Resource Board would tell you is that renewable natural gas has a carbon intensity that is at least 57% less than diesel, and as much as 3 times negative, right? So a negative score, on the carbon side. So it's real, from a carbon reduction perspective. And I'd say it's ready now because from a practical perspective, it's a truck that Paper Transport's been running since 2010, right? So the engine technology, the actual execution of freight, we've been doing that for 13 years now. So certainly it's practical and here now.
Yeah, I would just pile on Joe's point around, the question is about hydrogen or electric or even RNG, but it's really about alternative fuels versus diesel. The reality is diesel is a very fuel efficient way to operate a truck. So, that is in play, but there's no doubt that there is a desire both from at the state level and the federal level to move into some of these alternative fuels. And I think where it's maybe, I wouldn't say wrong, but maybe a little bit miscalculated is picking which fuel it is. And the reality is there's going to be a number of winners here. And, we all have to have our eyes open to what is the right solution versus kind of pigeonholing ourselves into this is the right technology.
Right. So, as you think about the solutions or the alternatives, and you think about that question, I think timing is really important, right? So can you just kind of lay out, where we're at with hydrogen? You think we're, 5 years out, 10 years out, where we're at with EV, and obviously where we're at with RNG, CNG?
Sure. So hydrogen, I think what they say is it's the fuel that's about 15 years out and always will be.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah, that makes sense, yeah.
So I think, there's a new engine, being created from Cummins. And they're saying, the engine's going to be available earlier, but, real production, they're talking, late 2030s on that, right? So it's the fuel that's 15 years out and always will be on hydrogen is what they say. Electric, again, I'm not sure, that it can really work effectively in a Class 8 scenario. Right. Just because what you need from a low-cost fuel or low-carbon fuel is to be able to execute a lot of it, to save carbon emissions, but also then just to save money on that cheaper fuel to pay for the higher capital costs. So I don't know that it's ever going to be very effective in Class 8s, but it's certainly a huge application in Class 6 trucks, right? And the delivery trucks bopping around the city. Totally makes sense in that space. And I don't remember if this was the full question, but again, RNG, natural gas, that's here today. We can run, and we do run regional trucks, throughout the country, on RNG, a negative carbon intensity fuel.
So what are we doing for current customers in regards to sustainability?
Yeah, so there's a lot in that space, right? Because that's not just about alternative fuels. We can do better, right? And it's probably because our customers have not demanded of us on reporting, right? I think, frankly, we're leading in this space, right? Our MPG is far outpacing the industry, and that's something that we should be touting and can save a ton of carbon emissions for our customers. And so I think that that's one space. Secondly, we've put a lot of energy and technology behind eliminating empty miles off the road, right? So what's the best way to save carbon? Don't run the mile at all. Right? And so that's something that we're doing a fantastic work in, and that we can do better at sharing with our customers. Past that, we've got our intermodal offering. So when you put a unit of freight on the train, it's a third as much carbon as on the road. And then, of course, the alternative fuels that we've spent some time talking about.
Right.
So a lot of that space, and part of it is singing the song better for us.
Right.
Yeah, I think some of the noise comes with, we're talking about hydrogen or RNG or EVs, and everybody talks about it in terms of kind of an all-in. Everything is going to go EV. Everything is going to go RNG. And, the reality is there's going to be a place for a lot of these. And if we talk about where each one makes sense, I think that ultimately is what's going to lead to more progress instead of debating which one's going to, kind of win outright.